Hello everyone, this is Swati Shastri taking a session on user interface design. In the previous class, we have studied about window operations, what all kind of operations can be done on a window whenever you consider a graphical user interface. Okay, so the next thing that we have to think about or learn about is whether these in window operations can be operated onto a web user interface. Okay, so till now whatever you learned, it was about graphical user interface for a particular machine when it is running offline. So but if you have a website, then what it is going to happen, whether the operations of the window or not just the operations of the window, whether the window is applied onto this particular web systems or not. So in today's class, we'll be seeing or we'll be just briefing about how these things can be accomplished in a web system. Not most of the things are feasible inside a web system because it is just a single page. But even then, we'll try and differentiate some things which can be deduced from a graphical user interface window onto a web interface. Okay, so when you consider this WI, you have something called as web systems. So today we are going to learn about this web systems, and web systems have been divided into two sections: frames and pop-up windows. So we'll see this, what are frames and pop-up windows. Okay, so let's come to the web systems. So web systems, whenever you have a very limited kind of a windowing capacity. You do not have more kind of capacities. So to increase some part of capacities of your window web systems, what we do is we go for frames and we go for pop-ups. Okay, so the concept of frame, it provides a window like ability for a web system. So when you consider any web page, it is like a single page, so there are no windows kind of a thing. So if you want to have that window kind of a view, that time you go for something called as frames inside the web system. If you are interested in any pop-up regarding windows in the web system, then you will be going across something called as JavaScript in the web systems or web user interfaces. So we'll start with the frames. What are frames is almost known by everyone, because whenever you start learning scripting, you usually perform frames and all. So we will see how the frame is, what descriptions can be given for a frame, what is it used for, how to use that properly, and we'll also see the guidelines whenever you're providing frames, what things you should consider. Okay, so we'll go through that, those kind of an overview for the frames, about the web system today. Okay, so whenever you consider frames, a multiple web screen panes, it can be called as a multiple web screen panes that permit the displaying of multiple documents onto a page. After all, whenever you consider a website or a web page, it is a single page. No doubt you give navigation from one page to another page, but simultaneously you will be viewing only one page. No two pages can be viewed at a time. So such kind of information or such kind of possibilities are not there in your web user interface design. But rather, if you consider graphical user interface design, you can open up two windows, so you're moving from one window to other window. Such things are possible. But rather, when you consider WUI, that time that is not possible. Web interface, you do not have that, right? So everything is in a single page. But if you make use of frames in a web page, then what you can do is you can have multiple web screen panes. Like you can make a small pane describing one thing, one more pane describing one more thing. So it will give you a multiple documents on the single page. Okay, so these documents can be independently viewed, scrolled and updated. So you can have independency between those documents. So it will look like multiple windows only. So you have 3 or 4 windows. Like for example, if you are opening a Gmail itself. So how you have, like Gmail has a left navigation bar and a top bar wherein it will go for ask for back, selections, go to important documents or something of that sort you have, and in between you have like the inbox and all. So The point is that there are three basically frames: the top frame, the side frame, and the middle frame where the inbox is being displayed. So these frames give you a different kind of a look. Few frames are fixed, few frames are changing. So you can independently scroll them. Like you are scrolling the left drop down box of the Gmail, that is possible. Or if you want, you can scroll the inbox of the Gmail if you want. Only that part can be scrolled, so you can handle this according to the frames. So different frames will be having different scrolling capacity, different kinds of views, so you can update it differently. So that is the plus point regarding the frame. And the documents are presented in the tiled format, so you can present these documents under a tiled format. Okay, so I mean group of informations is what is nothing but a tiled format. Okay, so when do you make use, or how do you make use of frames properly? So you can make use of these frames properly if you keep few things in mind. That is, first one is for content expected to change frequently, only then you will be making use of frames. So if you make use of frames every now and then, which is not required and all, it might be tough for you for the designing, correct? So if you have a content wherein you expect that content to change very often, then it is better that you make use of frames, because only that part of the window will be changing. Other parts of the web page can be kept constant, or if all of them are changing, it is really very good. It looks a bit dynamic and everything is like minimum visible. Okay, to allow the users, to allow the users to change the partial screen content. So some part of the screen content can also be changed if you are using frames. Then next, to permit the users to compare multiple pieces of information. So you can use these frames for comparing multiple informations for the sake of users. Like one content on one frame and another content on another frame will give you a slight comparison of frames. Correct? Slight comparison of contents inside the frames. Now, whether these frames are advantageous or disadvantageous, when you can say that like you have certain advantages but disadvantages are more in number. So we'll just go through the advantages and disadvantages. When you consider advantages, they are just three in number. So they decrease the user's need to jump back and forth between screens, thereby reducing the navigation related cognitive overhead. So that overhead of coming front and going back, that is removed. That's good thing, right? They increase the user's opportunity to request, view, and compare multiple sources of information. So if you want to have multiple source of information comparison and all, view, or if you're requesting for that, then that is possible. So that's good. They allow content pages to be developed independently of the navigation pages. Whatever contents you have, you need not provide it under navigation of pages. It can be developed or viewed independently without any dependency. Okay, so these are the advantages. What can be the disadvantage of using this particular frames? Whenever you make use of frames, mostly cluster around navigational shortcomings can be there. So what is that? The first thing is that the difference between the single web page and a page with the frames is not always obvious to the user. So if you are having a single web page and some page is regarding frames, then the comparison or difference is obviously faced by the user. Some users may understand that, or some users may not understand that. If he is very much used to single page, that time he cannot make use of these frames that easily. Maybe he will not get adapted to that. Okay, so they suffer some of the shortcomings of tiled screens. Because you have frames, you will group the screen into smaller parts. Because that thing is there, that styled screens will be there, you may face some shortcomings. Those shortcomings are, first one is that only a limited number can be displayed in the available screen area. You cannot have n number of frames or anything of that sort. You have a very limited number of them. Next, they are perceived as crowded and more visually complex, because frame borders are flush against one another, and they fill up the whole screen. Okay, because of the, like, every frame will be having its own border. Okay, when you have that own border, the frame gets the screen gets filled up by these borders, and these borders are so clearly visible sometimes in some of the user interfaces that they create a flush against one another, like they're over loading the content. More than the content, the frames are being visible, the borders are being visible. But this is actually up to the mark of the designer. If the designer gives it a better look, if he avoids the frame borders and all, this particular disadvantage can be overcome. But no doubt, like, he is having a limited area and limited amount of data will be visible. All those things are existing, but he can avoid a kind of an unpleasantness for an eye of the user. Okay, so crowding, he cannot avoid. Crowding is actually attenuated if the borders contain scroll bars and control icons. If you have too many scroll bars, I suppose even Gmail has a scroll bar, that's a biggest example that you can have. But you do not have too many scroll bars in that. The Gmail itself is the best example. So the scroll bars may have an hamper, but it may draw certain attention by the user, like the border area especially, not the data, correct? Then the next disadvantage that you can have is that frame based pages behave differently from that of the web pages. They do not behave the same. Obviously frames are different, next. Because you have this, the page printing difficulties and problems may exist. You cannot just go and print it directly. That is not possible, right? Next is that page interaction can become clumsy. The interaction between the pages might be a bit problematic. Next is that URLs cannot be emailed to other users. If you have too many frames, everything inside, like from a single frame's URL, you cannot borrow that. So taking up the URL will give you the whole site's URL, right? And frames will not work on old browsers. So nowadays you do not have old browsers, but if anyone is using these old browsers, they will definitely face a problem regarding frames, because not all the browsers support these frames. Okay, so this is regarding frames. But what if you want to make use of frames? Few guidelines you need to remember. So that is that you have to use only a few frames, 3 or maybe less than that at a given time. So you should not have like, I have frames, so I'll fill in like 5, 6, 7, 8. No, that is not correct. Okay, choose the sizes based upon the type of the information to be presented. Based on the information, like if you consider your Gmail itself, like you have a more space for inbox so that you can open up your mail and watch it out, right? So you choose the size based on the importance of that particular section. Next is that never force viewers to resize the frame to see the information. Like you should not allow them to resize the frames. Like Gmail does not allow you, like you want to view the whole of the inbox information for the whole screen. That thing is not there in your Gmail, right? So that should not be given. That so you should not allow the users to resize the frames at all, and never use more than one scrolling region on the page. Do not, like if you have 3 frames, if you have all the 3 frames you are giving scrolling and all, that is not good. You better give it for one, not for all. Okay. So these are the guidelines that are to be maintained if you are trying to use a frame in a web user interface design, whenever you are trying to design a web interface. Okay, so if you want a pop-up window regarding a web system, if you are using a web system and you want a pop-up window, the best option is that you have to go for JavaScript. That is the only option. But the only thing that you should remember whenever you're giving pop-up window is that you should be extremely cautious, because they are quite hampering. Okay, so JavaScript pop-up windows, they began in somewhere in 1996 itself. Okay, so their use is multiplying because we are using it too much. In the view of almost all web users, you are going to pollute these particular screens because very many things are being added onto that particular a pop-up window. So they're usually if you want to see these pop-up windows, they are usually used for advertisings. So if you open anything, all of a sudden something pops up, that's called as a pop-up window, which is designed by your JavaScript. So that comes with your web user interface. So you can give a pop-up window for anything, like if you want the user to prompt to have his username and password and all. So that time you're giving a pop-up window, that is good. If you consider it money wise, advertisements are the best option. But it should not be so much that it irritates the user and he leaves your user interface. So if you're using pop-up windows, you should be quite cautious about that. That's it. Okay, so what we have learned today is regarding the web system do not have all the features about the windows. To have windows, we learned that we had to have frames, which will create a kind of a look of multiple documents onto a web page, because web page is single in nature. And to have a pop-up window, we make use of JavaScript in web user interfaces. Okay, so in the next class we'll be seeing about how to select proper device based controls like mouse or light pen or keyboard trackballs, which is to be used. That is what we'll be learning in the next class. Okay, thank you.